Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, we'll be discussing who is the best premium midfielder, who is the midfielder that you have to have in your FPL teams. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button. And if you are new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, in today's video, we are going to be discussing the 6 premium midfielders priced 9.5 and above. I did consider putting the likes of Odegaard and Bruno Fernandes in there, but for me, they're not really premiums. They're a completely different price point. So we've got Foden, KDB, Son, Saka, PALMER, and also Salah as well. And we're going to start with the most expensive in Mohamed Salah. What I thought I would do is talk about them each individually, look through their fixtures, look through their stats, and then at the end of the video, there is a table comparing them all and giving them a bit of a ranking to give you an idea about how I would compare them side by side. So hopefully the video is useful. If it is, smash that like button. And all of the stats that I've used for today's video, including fixture analyzer, the underlying statistics, the touch maps, all of that is courtesy of Fantasy Football Hub. And at the moment, if you use the top link in the description, you can get 50% off if you sign up using that link. So do check it out. I would highly recommend it for the best fantasy football experience. So, Mohamed Salah. I thought this would be one of those like auto picks that you always get every season in FPL, a bit like Alexander Isak. I just thought Salah's only 12.5 million. Haaland is 15. Not many people are going to want to go for Haaland, but you want that reliable captaincy option. He plays Ipswich in game week 1. Everyone's going to have Salah, and I'm really not going to have to talk about him much in pre-season, but we're sat here with him only at 33.5%. So why have only a third of the game got him? Why have more people not got Mohamed Salah? Well, despite the fact that Haaland is now suffering with what Pep calls niggles, and he said this last season, by the way, and he was out for about 2 or 3 months, but Haaland is somewhat struggling with fitness, so maybe Salah becomes a little bit more highly owned now as well, but a lot of people deciding to go with Haaland instead of Salah, which is absolutely viable, assuming Haaland is available. But also a lot of people choosing to go without both. And I'm going to have a draft tomorrow on my channel without Salah and without Haaland to see, is it viable and does it feel like a good balance to the team? But I'm not sure I can get massively on board with that. I look at Salah and I'm like, what more do you possibly want? And of course there are negatives which we'll discuss, but starting with the fixtures, look at them, look at those opening 6, and even if you ignore the colours, right, because obviously the FDR rating system that the Premier League use isn't perfect. Ipswich away, anything can happen in game week 1. Ipswich could put in an incredible performance, but that's a great fixture. You've then got Brentford at home, and Liverpool have always traditionally been very, very good at Anfield. We don't know under Arne Slot, of course, but that feels like a pretty decent fixture. Although Brentford were okay defensively last season. United were awful. Lenny Yoro looks like he'll be out for a couple of months, is the latest rumours. I can't see that being an especially difficult game for Liverpool. Forest at home is much better than if it was away. I like that fixture. Again, Bournemouth at home, another home fixture. And then Wolves away. Wolves are actually a little bit stinky, I suppose, at Molineux last season. So I look at those opening 6. I really like them for an attacker, especially someone like Salah. And then when we move on to the stats, they kind of just keep getting better. And it's one of the reasons why I find it very difficult to go without Salah. So FPL points per 90... 7.49, which is very impressive. There are some players, I was discussing in a second, which were slightly better last season, but it's very consistent, and he tends to always average above 7 FPL points per 90 as well. He's just a very consistent FPL asset. But what I like about Salah is he had 7.46 expected FPL points per 90. So you'll see a lot of these players, they drastically overperform their expected data. And what that means is what we would expect from them based on where they're creating chances from and where they're taking shots from, they're drastically overperforming that, which is usually good in a sense because it means that they either are a very good finisher themselves or they're playing in a team with other good finishers so that when they create chances, their teammates finish them. So it's not a huge issue. But what this says for me is that it's sustainable with Salah because he always puts up very good underlying data. He gets a lot of chances. He creates a lot of chances as well. And therefore, you would expect that to continue to be the case that he'll deliver the FPL points. And when we look at his non-penalty expected goals, it is the best on this list by some distance. So it's set up at 0.54. So even if you ignore the fact that Salah is almost definitely still on penalties, his underlying data without penalties is exceptional. Now, if we were to find out that Salah was no longer on pens because actually he doesn't have a great penalty record, and someone like Szoboszlai or McAllister or even Darwin took one instead, then maybe you look at that and go, yeah, his underlying data without pens is great, but you want penalties for a £12.5 million asset. So that would be the only reason I could see here that you wouldn't probably want Salah, or at least you wouldn't at least highly consider him, because that underlying data is really good. I mean, that means he puts up one expected goal every 2 games, which is a lot better than pretty much every other midfielder that you're looking at in FPL. And what I love about Salah in the last 2 or 3 years is he's added creativity to his game as well. You can see 0.27 expected assist. It does kind of match up with a lot of the other elite midfielders in FPL. So he can score goals, he can create goals. And then the damning stat, because this is absolutely ridiculous, he has 1.99 big chance involvements per 90. So what I do for big chance involvement is I just simply add big chances that they've had plus big chances they've created. Every 90 minutes, let's say he gets 90 minutes in a game, he'll be involved in 2 big chances in some regard. And usually he'll be getting the big chances himself. I just think they're ridiculous stats and ridiculous opening fixtures. And I'm very biased. I love Salah as an FPL asset. He is in my draft, so I should caveat that. But I wonder what more you want from an asset. You want penalties, got it. You want good minutes, he's got it. You want him to have had a summer of rest. He's got that. He's got great opening fixtures and he's got the best underlying data of all the midfielders. Now, if we move on to the negatives, because I'm just obviously praising, his price is very expensive. He is 2 million more than Cole Palmer at the next most expensive midfielder, and 2 million goes a long way. If you go to someone like Foden or Kevin De Bruyne instead, you're saving 3 million. So he is very expensive. But I suppose the biggest reason that you might not want to have him is we do not know how Liverpool will look under Arne Slot. So far in pre-season, it's not been great, but they've got a lot of players returning back late, which I suppose could be another reason that you don't necessarily want to start with loads of Liverpool assets, because how quick are they going to hit the ground running? And if they struggle against Ipswich and Brentford, well, then they start to go into... They're still decent fixtures, but the more tricky fixtures of the opening set. I really do like those opening couple, and you want them to hit the ground running. So I do wonder, yes, Salah in the past in the Premier League under Klopp has been absolutely miraculous, and his data is so consistent, and even without the great fixtures, you'd still expect points from him. But does that change under Arne Slot? We don't know. So I do think that has to be given some weight, that there is that unknown part of how Liverpool will line up, how they'll play in, and how Salah will play as well. So I'll leave it there. I think he's fantastic, but I do understand that there is that unknown element, and also he is very expensive. So I don't think Salah is an auto pick. I think he's a very good pick, but I would argue that none of these midfielders are actually auto picks. So I'm finding Cole Palmer a very difficult one, because I started pre-season saying he's a very good option, and then a week or 10 days in, I was like, you know what, I actually think Cole Palmer is the best mid-priced midfielder, and that's not a spoiler alert, because I might have changed my mind. Cole Palmer, I still think, is right up there as one of the very best. I think there is much more to like about him than to not like about him. And I still think 10.5 isn't overly expensive. I think it's on the upper end of what you'd want to pay for him, but I don't think it's a ridiculous price. The real issue with Cole Palmer is that Nkunku sat there, and I've been thinking about this more and more, and I hate the way that I'm thinking, but I also do think it makes some sense. Cole Palmer and Nkunku are different players, and they take up different slots in your team. Saying that I'm not going to go for Cole Palmer at 10.5 because I'm going to have Nkunku at 6.5, logically, that doesn't make sense. If you think Cole Palmer is the best midfielder priced around 10 million, and you think Nkunku is the best midfielder priced at 6.5, then you should pick both of them. And I know that becomes a double up then, and you have a double up against Man City at home in the first opening game, but they are still 2 players, right? If you expect Palmer to do well, that doesn't mean that Nkunku won't. In fact, if Nkunku does, Palmer probably does as well, because they're going to be linking up for Chelsea. So I think it's fallacious thinking. It's not the way that you want to approach FPL, is to say, well, I'm not going to pick Palmer because I've got Nkunku at 6.5, when, like I said, they're 2 different players. Hopefully that makes sense, because it's almost annoying me that that's my thought process, but that is the thought process, because you're like, well, I want to sort of cover the Chelsea attack, and Nkunku sat there, I can save 4 million. But let's discuss Palmer more so himself. Is he worth the 10.5? Well, the fixtures are absolutely unbelievable. I would say as good as, maybe slightly worse, just because of that opening game against Man City, than Liverpool. And really, and I know this is a stupid thing to say because it's not that way, if that Man City at home game was in game week 3, right? So let's say Chelsea had exactly the same opening 6 fixtures, but it was Wolves, Palace, City, Bournemouth, West Ham, Brighton. Would you pick Cole Palmer if you've not got him? I'm not saying everyone would suddenly have him, but I reckon his ownership would shoot up by 10 to 15%. I think it's as low as, and I know it's not particularly low, 53, is because of that opening game. And you need to pick more than just for one game week in FPL, especially with being able to roll up to 5 free transfers. You're going to want a Chelsea attacker for this run of fixtures. I really like a lot of those. I mean, Wolves, Bournemouth, and West Ham being the away fixtures, I could see goals for Chelsea. Palace at home is actually okay because they were much better at Selhurst Park. And Brighton, we don't know exactly how they'll line up under new management. I don't see any... This is my only criticism of the fixtures. I don't see any like banker fixtures in there, right? They're not playing against any of the newly promoted teams. They've not got a home game in there where you're like, wow, that is an absolute banker of a fixture. So that's the only reason that I think maybe they're slightly weaker than the Liverpool fixtures. But generally, I like them. And as you can see, Palmer's data was very solid last season. He actually had more FPL points per 90 than Mohamed Salah at 8.37. His expected FPL points, though, were lower. And this is what I was saying. Palmer drastically, I should say, overperformed his expected FPL points. You can see there, but almost 2 FPL points per 90, which is quite a big amount. And I suppose that's because he obviously tucked away every penalty he had, which is sat at about a 0.8 XG. But also, he's an exceptional finisher. I think when you get him in front of goal, you expect him to score. And he scored a couple of absolute worldies as well. So it makes sense why he overperformed, and he could absolutely do that again. But his underlying data isn't, of course, as strong as someone like Salah. So his non-penalty expected goals at 0.35. So that is about 0.2 less than Salah. So not awful and very, very solid. But they're not that's not outstanding goal threat, you wouldn't say. And his expected assist is almost identical to Salah at 0.28. So another thing I like about Cole Palmer, and we'll say this about a couple of players coming up in a second, I like the goal threat and assist threat because what I want from a player is multiple routes to points. And if Cole Palmer isn't getting big chances and scoring goals, he's still creating and he'll still get you the odd assist as well. So I like the fact that he's got goals, he's got assists, and his big chance involvement is up at 1.37. But I want to massively caveat that was due to the extreme number of penalties, and every penalty counts as a big chance. If you remove the big chances from penalties, that's just under 1, I believe. I was trying to do the maths on it. It's not easy to do, but I think that drops it quite a bit. And I'm not saying that he won't get penalties. Chelsea could get another 8 penalties this season, but it doesn't tend to happen that they get like double digits in penalties in the Premier League. I mean, it's a ridiculous number of penalties to get. We saw it from Manchester United a few seasons ago. I think Bruno scored about 10 or 11 penalties, and in the following season, it was only about 4. So you can see it where there's a massive drop-off, especially if referees get a bit of wind that there's a reputation for a team having got a lot of penalties. Sometimes it can go in the other direction. So I really like Cole Palmer. Is there anything to dislike about him? Well, the only thing to dislike is he is the second most expensive midfielder in the game. And like I said, you can sort of cover the Chelsea attack with a very impressive 6.5 million in Nkunku, who's likely to play through the centre and be very involved in the Chelsea attack. So if you do only want one Chelsea attacker, maybe Nkunku is the one, but I wouldn't be completely put off going for both of them. I suppose the other issue with Chelsea in general, not only Palmer but Nkunku, is again under new management. We don't know how they'll line up, and that's the same with Salah as well. Chelsea have looked even worse during pre-season. I've not been very impressed at all. But again, Cole Palmer's not even there playing. So we need to wait and see how they are with Cole Palmer back in there. But did Cole Palmer just massively suit Pochettino's style of play? Was Pochettino truly getting the most out of Cole Palmer? Again, I don't know. So it will be interesting to see. 10.5 is a lot. And obviously, if you do have Nkunku rather than Palmer, that 4 million goes such a long way. So he's been in and out of my recent drafts. I still think he's fantastic, but as per Salah, he's absolutely not an auto pick in my opinion. So we move on to a man that I think is probably being the most underestimated and underappreciated, potentially behind Heung-min Son, who I'll discuss in a second, and that is Bukayo Saka, only at 26.5%. So he's basically owned by a quarter of managers. And I would say it might even be slightly lower amongst engagement. I'm seeing so many teams without Bukayo Saka. And listen, I get he's had a price rise this season. He is going to be returning late from his break after the Euros. And he did suffer with his fitness last season. And when you just look at the opening 5, ignore that Leicester fixture in Game Week 6, because a lot of people look in blocks of 5. And I don't dislike that, by the way. You just have to choose how many fixtures you look at a time. If you look at the opening 5, they've got away games against Villa, Spurs, and City. They are not a nice opening set of fixtures. But I would draw your attention to the other 3 games in the opening 6 being Wolves at home, Brighton at home, and Leicester at home. There are 3 fantastic home fixtures. And I would also draw your attention to how it is after that. So after that, in Game Week 7, they've got Southampton at home, and then they've got Bournemouth away. Then there's another little tricky run of fixtures. But if you were to then instead, which I tend to do when I'm picking a player that I'd like to keep for the foreseeable future, looking over 8 game weeks, well, then you've got games against Wolves at home, Brighton at home, Leicester at home, Southampton at home, and Bournemouth away. And on top of that, games like Villa versus Arsenal or Spurs versus Arsenal, you just never know. That could be a 3-3 thriller. We saw that last season in some of the big games. Yes, it could also be like a 0-0 bore fest, but I don't think the fixtures would put me off massively from Saka. And I also don't think they're that bad if you're looking across the first 8. So fixtures-wise, I'm not sure it would put me off. The other thing we know about Saka is he plays whether he's fit or not, right? Arteta just plays him every single game pretty much. And you might say that you think that will change this season. We've seen no indication of that. Arteta has come out in a recent press conference and basically said that he sees no reason why the players that were at Copa America and at the Euros won't just return straight back into the team for game week 1. So I'm feeling fairly confident there because, I mean, Arteta I thought would play him anyway, but it's nice to get that confirmation. And also, he's on penalties as well. So the first 3 players that we've looked at, Salah, Palmer, Saka on pens. I know he gives up the odd pen to someone like Ødegaard, but largely he's first choice. You can see by his touch map as well. He also takes set pieces and corners. Usually only in-swinging corners, doesn't take out-swinging, but it's another bow to his arrow. The fact, is that the word? I don't think that's the saying, is it? It's another tool to his arsenal, let's say that, and it's a nice little pun there as well, that he can take set pieces, he can take penalties, he can take corners, he can take shots, he's got the assist threat. Bukayo Saka is so multifaceted as a footballer, but also in terms of how he can get you FPL points. Now, in terms of his FPL points per 90, 6.93, so very, very consistent. I think that's lower than both Palmer and Salah, if I remember correctly. And his expected FPL points slightly lower as well at 6.36. But he's not, again, drastically overperforming his expected data there, which means that, in my opinion, it's probably more sustainable and consistent that we didn't see a drastic overperformance last season. That's roughly what we would expect from him on a consistent basis. You almost know what you're going to get from Saka, and I think something that's nice in comparison to Palmer and Salah, Arteta has been there for a few years now. You know what you're going to get from Saka under Arteta. Again, there could be a big change in Arteta's system, but I can't see it from an attacking perspective. So I'm expecting very much the same from Saka, and therefore I think he is good value. In a very similar way to Palmer, and also I suppose Salah, he's got really good goal threat and then also really good assist threat. So 0.32 non-penalty expected goals. That is slightly lower than Salah and Palmer, but then he's got slightly higher assist threat at 0.33. And if you put those together, you are talking about a 0.65 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90, which is really solid. Big chance involvement down slightly at 1.13, which isn't ideal. You want them to be, and big chances isn't the best measurement, by the way. Sometimes things aren't or are classified as big chances, and you're like, what is that? But the reason I include it is, for example, and I'll use this discussion when we move on to Son. 2 players can have 0.5 XG, right? Player A has 0.5 XG, player B has 0.5 XG. But player A might have taken 25 shots at 0.02 XG, and player B might have taken 1 shot at 0.5 XG. I would absolutely prefer the player that has only had the 1 chance, but at a much higher expected goals, because it means it was a higher quality chance. Hopefully that makes sense, and it's honestly one of the downfalls of just looking at expected data, because I don't know how many shots per season Saka took, unless you start to break down all of the stats and go into it in a lot of detail. How many shots contributed to that expected goals? How many passes contributed to that expected assist? So Saka's not involved in a small amount of big chances, but it's obviously not as big as someone like Mohamed Salah. Overall, I would just say that if you're looking for consistency and someone that we know exactly how they'll line up and how they'll play in a specific system, Saka feels like the most reliable option to start the season. I would say he's got the least uncertainty around him. Some players we don't know where they'll play. Some players under new management. Saka's just that guy that you just know will get the minutes. He'll play in a very specific system and a very specific position. And as a result, I think you could do a lot worse than picking Bukayo Saka for game week 1. So moving on to the truly forgotten man. I just said Saka was underappreciated, but Son's almost forgotten. He's still under 10% ownership at the time of me recording this, which is bonkers. Sonny was the same price last season, I believe, or very similar, and everyone was raving about how good he was, and now he's the same price again this season. Other people have gone up, and we're like, no, we don't want Son anymore. And I understand why, because there are some other really, really good picks, and 10 million is a lot, and the fixtures aren't fantastic for Spurs, but more importantly, there are a lot of unknowns, and I think that is my big issue with Spurs and Son. It's not necessarily the fixtures, because Yes, they are playing against some very decent defences. Leicester is a great fixture in the opening day, and I really like the idea of having Heung-min Son there. And I've toyed with the idea of, I don't like booking in transfers, but starting with him and maybe moving him on after game week 2 or game week 3. Because yes, Everton at home on the fixture difficulty rating is green, but they were good defensively last season. Newcastle away, you would expect that to be a much more difficult fixture this season. Arsenal, most difficult fixture in the league. Maybe not at home, but it's at least a difficult fixture. Brentford were good defensively last season. Will they continue? We'll have to wait and see. And with United, you never know which version of them will turn up. So I'm not saying they're the worst set of fixtures you could hope for, but they're certainly not fixtures that you desperately want to target. So yeah, I look at those opening 6 and you could certainly do better. But the big issue for me with Spurs is, who are they going to sign? There are rumours that they want to go after Eze, who is predominantly a left winger, which would mean Son is absolutely playing through the middle, and he's got the creative force of Eze next to him. I don't think that will happen, but that's one rumour. Another rumour is that they're after Chiesa. Chiesa plays on the right, which means that there's a chance that Brennan Johnson might come over to the left, and Sonny would start through the middle. But the biggest rumour is obviously Ivan Toney, and if they sign Ivan Toney, not only does Son go out to the left, and I'm not saying Son's a bad option on the left, by the way. He was brilliant for multiple years there with Harry Kane through the centre. And maybe Tony's the sort of player he needs to perform there. But it means he's no longer the main goal threat for Spurs. And also, I would be extremely shocked if Son keeps penalties with Toney joining. Toney is one of the best penalty takers in world football. We saw that in the Euros once again. He's just extremely consistent with these penalties. So if Son is pushed out to the left and taken off pens, I don't think he's worth 10 mil. I think you need the penalties, and I think you need him to be one of the primary goal threats at Spurs. So due to all of those unknowns, I find it difficult. And the other issue you've got, and I've said this a few times, but it's good to remind ourselves, the transfer window is still open in game week 1. Game week 1 is like August 16th. So you've still got a couple of weeks before the transfer window shuts. So it might be that we go into game week 1, and that's the fixture you really want him for, I suppose. And there's no real rumours around Spurs signing Toney, and it seems to have died down. And then the day after the Game Week 1 deadline, it all erupts, and Toney is, here we go, and he's going to sign for Spurs. And then all of a sudden, again, you've lost penalties, and he's not playing in the position that you thought he would. So that's my only concern with Son, as well as the fixtures, is I'm just not sure exactly how that Spurs front line will line up, because we still don't know exactly who they're going to sign. Now, looking at the underlying data, it's actually very solid for Son, but it's the worst of the forwards we've looked at thus far. So his FPL points per 90 was 6.51 last season, but his expected FPL points per 90 was down at 5.16. So that is definitely the lowest that we've seen yet, and it's also not particularly good objectively. You'd want slightly higher than that. It would still give a good overall score if he played 90 minutes every game for all 38 games, but I'd like to see that above 6, really, from what you can see from other sort of premium assets. His goal threat is very decent at 0.3, but again, I believe that is the lowest of all of the midfielders that we've looked at thus far. And his assist threat is 0.24, which again, I believe, from memory, is the lowest of all of the midfielders we've looked at thus far as well. So putting that together, he's sat at 0.54 in non-penalty expected goal involvement, which is fine. It's not awful. And the thing with Son is he is absolutely elite at finishing. I believe in the top 3 forwards in world football for the last 5 seasons in terms of finishing ability, and that needs to be taken into account. If you are going to put any of the midfielders on this list through on goal, I fancy Son to finish it. But also that doesn't mean that you just don't look at the data and you just say Son's a fantastic finish. You do need to consider that he's not getting the same quantity of chances. Now, what I said about Saka doesn't quite apply to Son, because Son didn't have many penalties last season, but he's still up at 1.22 big chance involvement per 90. And something that I've noticed with Son is he doesn't create many chances and he doesn't get many chances. So I was looking into the data. He just gets big chances and he creates big chances quite often, which I do really like. In a game, you'll watch this with Son. You don't usually watch Son and think, oh, he's had like 5 big chances in this game. Well, you don't often watch Son and say, oh, he created so many chances for his teammates. You often watch it and think, wow, he just had a one-on-one, or he just created a brilliant chance for Kulusevski or something like that. And I like that because the decisive moments in the game, they're always very, very high quality with Son. And it means that it often does result in points. And also because he doesn't get tons of big chances and because his finishing is so good, he often doesn't miss those big chances as well, which means it doesn't negatively contribute towards bonus points as well. So I honestly think Son deserves to be much higher than 10%, but I also understand why he is so lowly owned because of the fixtures and because of the unknown. But that opening game against Leicester unless they sign Ivan Toney really quickly, you could imagine that he'll still start that as the number 9 on pens. I don't hate the idea of starting with Son and then potentially moving him on for someone else after that, but then you are booking in transfers. Let me know down below, do any of you actually own Heung-min Son? So moving on to the 2 final midfielders, I thought I'd look at them together because obviously they have the same opening set of fixtures and they play for the same team, and that is Kevin De Bruyne and Phil Foden. And I suppose the major concern with City, it wouldn't be the fixtures, it wouldn't necessarily be the data, it wouldn't be their ability to get you FPL points. It's the fact that both De Bruyne and Foden are still on a break after their commitments in the Euros. And also the quotes coming out from Pep Guardiola, which is essentially making it sound like there's very little chance they feature in the Community Shield, and there's a strong chance they don't play against Chelsea. And he even mentioned that even for Ipswich, they could still be given a break then. He wants to give his players, it sounds like, 3 to 4 week break, which would mean that it would be very tight for the start of the season. Now, obviously, if they're on the bench against Manchester United in the Community Shield and they get some minutes, then it looks good for a start in game week 1 because they've had at least a few minutes. They're back in the squad. I would expect at least one, potentially both, to start in game week 1. But if they're not in the squad for the Community Shield, there is a big leap of faith required to pick a player that's not played any minutes when Pep Guardiola himself has not only said that, listen, these players might not start the season for the Premier League, but also we know that he doesn't feel the need to rush players back often because he believes in the depth of his squad and the system that he's set up. We've seen that multiple times from players returning from injury and different duties, that he doesn't feel the need to chuck them straight back in. And he will absolutely think that he can get the job done against Chelsea without De Bruyne and Foden. But like I said, I think if they're on the bench, then great. And I think, therefore, the simple answer for the two of them is all eyes on the Community Shield and let's see what happens there with the squad. But in terms of, like, do I think they're good picks if they look like they're going to start in game week 1? Obviously, like, City scores so many goals. Don't be put off by that opening fixture. They could absolutely slaughter Chelsea. And then you've got Ipswich, West Ham, Brentford, 2 of those games being at home. And then, like I said, that Arsenal at home game could be anything. It could be 0-0, it could be 4-4. But you've just had 3 really good games in a row there, 2 of them being at home. And that Ipswich at home game in game week 2, and again, no disrespect to Ipswich, it could be an absolute bloodbath there. So I like the idea of having a City attacker. So fixtures-wise, love them. Obviously, they're cheap as well, or cheaper than a lot of the other premium midfielders. So 2 big thumbs up there. And the data is pretty strong for the 2 of them. So minutes last season, Foden was very nailed when he played. Kevin De Bruyne was not. And I guess it comes down to your own minutes expectations this season. Will Foden keep that role that he had last year? You'd expect so. Will De Bruyne get more minutes if he's fully fit, or at least fitter than he was last season? You'd probably hope so. So if I was to predict, I'd say like Foden will get similar, like 81 minutes per game sort of average, and you'd expect De Bruyne to be up in the 70s. But if it stays as this much of a disparity between the two, Foden's just immediately the better pick. You do not want to pick a £9.5 million midfielder that doesn't start every game and often comes off early. And we saw that with De Bruyne last season, mainly when he was returning back from injury, but he kept coming off early. And so I would say immediately, due to just minutes alone, Foden's probably the slightly better pick. But if you expect an upturn in Kevin's minutes, he's a very good asset. You can see they both averaged an extremely similar number of FPL points per 90, 7.19 and 7.23. And their expected FPL points per 90, pretty similar again, 5.88 for Kevin De Bruyne and 5.28 for Phil Foden. So very good for both, but not exceptional. And again, much weaker than the likes of PALMER and Saka and Salah as well. So we're seeing a bit of a downturn in their expected FPL points. Now, the data is very interesting because De Bruyne's total is actually quite a bit higher than Foden's, right? So De Bruyne's total is 0.18 expected goals plus 0.51 expected assists, which puts him up at 0.69 expected goal involvement per 90. Whereas Foden's is actually only a total of 0.54, which is the same as Heung-min Son. However, a much larger chunk of his is made up through expected goals. And this is kind of the chat we had last season at points, is overall, Kevin De Bruyne will deliver more attacking returns, you'd imagine, if they played a similar amount of minutes. But Foden will certainly score more goals. And so it's tricky. Will De Bruyne get enough assists and enough goals, obviously, to outweigh the fact that you would expect Foden to score more goals than him and potentially get more minutes? And I think it's a tricky one. I don't think there's much between them. But I just think due to the slightly greater minutes and the slightly greater goal threat, you'd have to favour Foden at the moment until we see more minutes from Kevin De Bruyne. The very big difference, though, is actually in their big chance involvement. Kevin De Bruyne's got almost double the big chance involvement of Foden. And interestingly, only 0.07 of that is made up through big chances himself. Kevin De Bruyne creates 1.54 big chances per 90. It's off the charts, the amount of big chances he creates. So he's likely to get you an assist per game if he's playing, which is silly numbers, really. And Foden doesn't get as many big chances. And this is what I was saying about what the numbers tell us. Foden's got comfortably the lowest big chance involvement per 90 out of all of the players here. He takes a lot of shots and he plays a lot of passes, but he doesn't get that many clear-cut big chances, and he doesn't create that many clear-cut big chances as well. So my concern with him would be that you are relying on him scoring the odd worldie, and the likes of Haaland and De Bruyne scoring the odd worldie off a Phil Foden pass. Listen, I like the two of them a lot. I think they're good value at 9.5 if they get the minutes, but I'm not sure that I desperately want to start with them unless we see them get minutes in the Community Shield. So guys, what I thought I would do to finish the video is, and again, I've had to actually say it on the graphic because I'm aware there is so many issues with the system I've used here. This is meant for entertainment and also a bit of a discussion. This is not an exact science. But what I've done is listed all of the things that I think would be important in FPL, and I've basically ranked them from 1 to 6, with 6 being they are the best for that category and 1 meaning they are the lowest. And I've basically just added them all up and given them a total and then ordered it by that total. And the issue that we've got with this is, number one, it doesn't take into account the difference between them, right? So if someone has significantly greater goal threat than the person in second, they're still only getting 1 extra point. For example, Salah. But also it doesn't take into account that some of these are more important. For example, non-penalty expected goals is so much more important than baseline bonus points. So this is meant for a bit of fun, but just to show you, like, who is the most well-rounded midfielder? Who is someone that ranks pretty well in all of these categories? And like I said, I've actually ordered this table by the person that finished first, and that is Bukayo Saka, with a total of 34 out of a possible 48. And you can see that actually, he's one of the only ones here that doesn't have a 1. I think Palmer's the only other one that doesn't have a 1, but Saka doesn't have a 1 anywhere, which means that he is pretty consistent for all of them. And the thing that I love about Saka is, like I said, so many routes to points. He's good for bonus points. He's got the penalties, okay fixtures, good assist threat, good goal threat, good minutes. There's very little to dislike about Saka. He's also not the most expensive, of course, too. So Saka's got everything. And whilst, as you can see at the end, my Raptor ranking, I don't think Saka's quite the best midfielder. I certainly don't think he's far off. And I think he's probably the one that's going the most sort of under the radar. He's been the most underappreciated, I think, by a lot of people. I think Saka is that good. Salah, interestingly, just below, because obviously he's the most expensive and also he's rubbish for bonus points. But if you remove those two, Salah there has got 4 6s, and he's the only one to have 4 6s there. He's the best for goal threat. He's the best for big chance involvement. He obviously has penalties, and he's got the best opening fixtures, in my opinion. So for me, at the moment, at the time of me recording, Salah and Saka are the 2 best premium midfielders. So if you are to only select 2, for me it's Salah and Saka. I did originally have Palmer in second, but he's just dropped to third for me, just due to the fact that I do really like Nkunku, which I know, again, is probably not the correct way to think about it. And also, he's 0.5 more. And I just really like Saka. I guess it's more so not that I don't like Palmer, but the more I look into Saka, I just think he's such a safe option to start the season with. So Palmer drops to third for me. And he's also third in the rankings, which, as I said, is not an exact science. But yeah, I think there's almost like an A group and a B group. If anyone watches Formula 1, you've got like Formula A and Formula B, where there's clearly a set of cars which are ahead and then a set of cars which are down below. And I think for me, at the moment, just based on, and I know I'm disrespecting Son here slightly, just based on the fact that we don't know exactly what's happening at Spurs, I think Salah, Saka, Palmer are in that A group, and I think KDB, Son, Foden are in that B group, personally. If Sonny is going to be on pens, and he is likely to be as the number 9, then I think you put Son up into that A group, but I still think he remains the 4th best option. And people will say, again, like, you're overlooking City, they're the best attack in the league, and for most parts they are, along with Liverpool. But my issue with them is, neither of them are on penalties, which immediately, and I know I probably overemphasize how important penalties are, but I want them. Their minutes aren't particularly secure in comparison to the other 4 players. The other 4 are more nailed. And also, there are concerns about how late they're returning back from their break. So I just think with all of those things considered, I can't justify picking KDB or Foden at the moment ahead of any of those other 4 options. So just to reiterate, my ranking would be Salah first, Saka second, Palmer third, Son fourth. In a lot of my drafts, I have had Salah, Saka, and then Kunku to try and cover Palmer, but I've also had all three of them. You'll see, I think in my most recent draft, actually, I had Salah, Saka, and Palmer. Because I just think if you have the three of those, you've got the three best premium midfielders. So guys, there you have it. That is my ranking of the premium midfielders in FPL. Hopefully you found this video useful, and if you did, please do smash that like button. And make sure to subscribe as well if you are new around here. Also, make sure to check out Fantasy Football Hub. If you enjoy all of the stats that I've used today, you can get all of that and much more if you use the top link in the description. Like I said, it's 50% off at the moment. As little as £3.25 per month it works out as. You can get access to all of the tools they have, and I think it's pretty useful. So thank you very much for watching. Until next time, bye-bye.